I first heard of KT Mcfarland from an interview she did with Simone Gao in Zooming In on YouTube. And she just struck me as someone who had a lot of information, which corroborated with what I already knew, but was also had a lot of new information, which I was very interested in, mostly just about foreign policy between America and concerning China, and also not only was her information really good, but also she was articulate and it was easy to follow what she was saying, I guess, and it was an interesting interview and a entertaining one. And so when I found out that she had written a book right here, I just was interested right away and I bought it. I haven't read it yet, but I just thought that I could read it and post it on here. That way, if anyone wants to listen, they can. And honestly, for myself, I'll probably go back and listen to this later. So really, this is kind of like a podcast or like a like an audible type of thing where I'm just reading this a lot. But I figured I'd just put the video there too, because I don't know, just I guess it would be a video too, and I might have some of my own dialogue here maybe. So and I'll break it into chapters and then put it in a playlist or something. So here we go. So this is Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People by KT Mcfarland. Chapter 1. Why I joined the Trump Revolution. I was as surprised as anyone by Donald Trump's victory. As a Fox News national security analyst, I had spent the day at our studios in Midtown Manhattan watching election commentary and occasionally providing analysis myself. I was convinced Hillary Clinton would win and, as president, take us even further along the path of economic and global decline. She might have been a less combative president than Trump, but she would have done nothing to stop the erosion of American power and increased indebtedness. She would not have taken the steps necessary to restore America to robust economic growth. As a result, she would have presided over the slow decline of American power and influence, and, in time, other countries would rise to take our place in the world stage. In the past, Clinton had picked the wrong foreign policy priorities. That's because Clinton's a globalist, but I think that's pretty obvious. But anyway, she had neglected the aggressive rise of China, yet pushed for interventionism abroad, especially in the Middle East and North Africa. I took no joy in being on cable news that day. I was just going through the motions, resigned to Hillary Clinton's blowout victory. But as polls started closing across the country and Trump unexpectedly won a few key counties and then some key states, the chatter in the green room at Fox changed. Was there a chance Trump might pull an upset victory? After I finished my last Fox Business News appearance, I headed to Trump's election night headquarters a few blocks away to watch the impossible first become possible and then inevitable. Someone said the Clinton campaign had just canceled their victory party caterer and the Hudson River fireworks display. Trump's upset victory was actually going to happen. I was a Trump supporter from the beginning. As a fellow New Yorker, I had followed him over the years and liked a lot of what he said, especially when it came to foreign policy. Trump had the guts to stake out contrarian positions at odds with both Republicans and Democrats. He may have expressed his views in an unconventional manner, but he had a better track record than most of the experts. I had given foreign policy advice to a number of presidential candidates over the last decade or so, but they were more or less interchangeable. None impressed me as having understood the urgent necessity of reorienting our attention away from the Middle East and toward Asia. Trump was the outlier. Finally, here was a Republican candidate who wasn't afraid to face reality, to admit the mistakes we made in foreign and economic policy, and commit to a major course correction. If he could ever manage to get elected, Trump might actually get something done, no matter how many people he offended along the way. I joined Trump's National Security Advisory Committee in the fall of 2016 after the Republican convention, and was one of the few well-known and experienced foreign policy experts to do so. I participated in prep sessions for his financial debates and was impressed by his ability to cut through the details and zero in on the core of an issue almost intuitively. I'd already had several interviews with his personnel team and thought I might be offered a senior position in his administration if he actually did win. If so, I would be going back to my roots in government service and fulfilling the dream of a lifetime. As I stood in the middle of the VIP section of Trump's of Trump's election night headquarters, I should have been over the moon with excitement and possibility. I should have been jumping for joy. But I wasn't. Instead, I felt an ominous sense that something life-altering, maybe for the better, maybe not, was about to happen to the country and to me. It was a deep feeling of foreboding that nothing would ever be quite the same again. My instincts were right, just not in the way I anticipated. By the 2016 election, it was clear America was ready for change. I think that was clear in 2008 when Obama ran on hope and change. But anyway, but definitely by 2016. By nominating Trump, the Republican Party had rejected the traditional Republican establishment. By electing Trump, the country rejected the entire Washington establishment, Republican and Democrat alike. The battle lines were now drawn. On one side were the elites of both parties who had governed America for decades, if not centuries, and supported big government and a globalist interventionist foreign policy. On the other side were the populists, the ordinary citizens who rarely got excited about politics but were now mobilized in rebellion against a governing class they believed was arrogant, unresponsible, and unsuccessful. It was a revolt by the governed against the governing. The Washington elites were stunned by Trump's victory. They had always taken for granted their inherent right to govern. They had assumed the country would elect one of their own in 2016, drawing yet again from one of America's political dynasties. The irony is many of Trump's supporters were just as stunned by his victory. I think Trump was actually stunned by that, but they identified with his political incorrectness and outsider status, but never actually thought he could beat Hillary and the Washington machine. Since the 2016 election, that divide has grown wider, increasingly rancorous, and more personally destructive. We are now living in the age of Trump, where the media is all Trump all the time. And I should say, let's see, what year is this from? Because I think it's recent. Oh, sorry. It's 2020. Okay, so just last year. And it's January 31st today. You can see that already. Anyway, okay. We are now living in the age of Trump, where the media is all Trump all the time. Everything in Washington, every person, politician, journalist, analyst, every issue, every policy is now measured as being either pro-Trump or anti-Trump. Our political classes have locked the country into a full-scale political civil war, which shows no sign of winding down. The outrage industry has cranked the discussion up to the point where we're always on edge. You can't even talk about the weather without being put into the pro-Trump or anti-Trump camp. There are no safe neutral zones in Washington. Pundits and politicians throw around words like populist and nationalist, elitist and globalist with wild abandon. The terms have been hijacked to sanctify or demonize people, depending on which camp they're in. They're the equivalent of four-letter words, shorthand for everything that is good about your camp and bad about the other camp. It's the pro-Trump national populists versus the anti-Trump global elitists. As loaded as these terms have become, there is no common agreement about what they actually mean. They mean one thing to the people who identify with them, and the complete opposite to the people who do not. Each side sees the other as the enemy and refuses to acknowledge they might possess any redeeming attributes, or even that they might have an opinion worth listening to. The only thing both sides have in common is that they see themselves as virtuous and true, and people on the other side of the Great Divide as wrong and sometimes even criminally evil. It's worth unpacking what these words mean to the people who identify with them and to the people who do not. Without definitions, we're just talking past each other, or more likely just screaming at each other. Chapter 2: Washington Elites versus American Populists. To the elites, populism means mob rule and represents the worst in American society, the uneducated, dim-witted masses who have neither the experience nor intelligence to govern themselves. They are the people who shop at Walmart and eat at McDonald's. The elites see nationalists as the bigoted, narrow-minded, white, mostly male supremacists who resent the rise of women, minorities, and immigrants. Barack Obama saw them as the bitter people who cling to guns or religion or antipathy toward people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustrations. End quote. Hillary Clinton said they belong in a basket of deplorables, characterized by racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic views. They see national, and she's not divisive according to her, but they see nationalists and populists as the people who are and deserve to be life's losers. In their version of America, populists are people driven by their hatreds and prejudices, and therefore morally inferior. Conservatives are either angry whites unwilling to make way for deserving minorities, or a rapacious business class trying to perpetuate their unfair privileges in order to keep their ill-gotten spoils. The governing elites see these populist nationalists as, at best, misguided and simplistic, and at worst, dangerous and evil. The same kind of people who supported Hitler and Mussolini and their racist nationalist agendas in the 1930s and 40s. In contrast, the elites see themselves as society's leadership class, who, by education, experience, and temperament, are best suited to make decisions for the rest of us. They see themselves as upholding the American values of equality, fairness, and inclusiveness. They focus on those in our society who have been treated unfairly in the past, those who didn't have equal access to education, opportunity, civil rights, or legal redress. They believe it is the job of government to compensate people for wrongs done to them, including to their ancestors in decades past, and to make up the difference with quotas and preferential treatment today. There is a whiff of self-righteousness about them, since they are convinced the things they believe in are universal truths shared by all civilized people and therefore beyond debate. It goes without saying that they believe that their motives are pure and that their virtuous beliefs make them morally superior. Therefore, they are and deserve to be the final arbiters of our society and government. When elites look abroad, they see an interconnected world which is moving beyond the nation-state to a global society and worldwide economy where people, information, goods, and money should move freely across borders. They are part of a post-nationalist movement that sees the world evolving toward a more peaceful and prosperous place where we will all be governed by universal norms and international organizations. True. Elitists equate nationalism with xenophobia and believe pride in one's country. And it's interesting that both sides consider Hitler's Germany as the other, in a way. But anyway, I just thought that. Elitists equate nationalism with xenophobia and believe because again, so right here, like elitists would say that Hitler's Germany was nationalist, but modern nationalists would say that Hitler's Germany was socialist more than it was actually nationalist. Elitists equate nationalism with xenophobia and believe pride in one's country has been the root cause of most of the wars of the last century. Their hope is that the next century will be one without trade wars, cold wars, or hot wars. It will be a world where international commerce and communication are so intertwined that they will naturally move toward a sort of utopia, bound together by commonly held beliefs, and governed by a global elite which rises above selfish national interests to create a more just and cleaner world. As for Trump, elites consider him so dangerous that he must be stopped dead in his tracks. For the first 2 years of his presidency, they were convinced the Mueller investigation would charge Trump with criminal offenses, and they shared fantasies that he would be hauled out of the White House in handcuffs and end up behind bars. When the Mueller report exonerated him, congressional Democrats and the anti-Trump media doubled down. Even if there's no evidence of colluding with the Russians to steal the election, Trump must be guilty of obstructing justice, somehow or other, for something or other. There might not be enough evidence to convict him in a court of law, but they could ruin him in the political courtroom of public opinion. The Democrat-led House of Representatives would vote articles of impeachment against him and force him to stand trial in the Senate. Failing that, they could have never-ending investigations of Trump, his family, and his associates going back decades. They would take anything he's ever said or did, give it their own spin, and scream impeachment, impeachment. They figured even if the Senate couldn't muster the 2/3 vote necessary to remove him from office, Trump would be so wounded politically that the voters would refuse to re-elect him in 2020. They're convinced that Trump is just too corrupt, too belligerent, too incompetent, and too evil to be America's president. They believe they have the right and even the responsibility to do whatever it takes, including suspending the rules, stretching the truth, and breaking the bounds of tradition to hound him from office. They've convinced themselves that once he's gone, the country will come to its senses and purge itself of all things, people, and ideas that are pro-Trump. Then Washington can get back to the pre-Trump normal. The never-Trump Republicans will once again be back in charge of the Republican Party, and the Democrats will return to power and reinstate Obama's tax and spend program at home, and globalist worldview abroad. The people who call themselves populists and nationalists may not always have a clear idea of what they are, but they do know what they are not. Most are neither wealthy nor powerful nor in charge. They see themselves as having been cast aside and trampled by the governing coastal elites who dominate the Democrat and Republican parties, Wall Street, Hollywood, the media, academic institutions, and especially Washington, D.C. They see themselves as the salt of the earth, patriotic, hardworking citizens, and the backbone of our nation. They love America, our culture, our history, our traditions, and believe they're the only ones upholding the traditional American values of hard work, self-reliance, personal responsibility, cohesive families, small government, balanced budgets, a strong military, and peace through strength. They pay their taxes, worship God, keep their families together, and believe in liberty and freedom. They think America is an exceptional nation, even if they're not quite sure why. Well, I can tell you why. It's because we've had a level of freedom and economic prosperity unrivaled by any other society in the history of the world, and that's why we've had so many immigrants come here. So, for people who don't, I could argue anybody on that pretty easily. I don't see why it's debatable why people think America's a special place. Show me any other place where the common folk had so much wealth and freedom, and where there was so much immigration as a result. Why have we had so much immigration, so many people coming here from all over the world, if it's not a special place? Riddle me that. But anyway, so I don't know if the people she's talking about know why, but I know why. They're opposed to what they see as an entitlement society where one group is favored over another and granted special privileges for some alleged injustice, often far in the past. They see multiculturalism as a threat to America's melting pot culture of inclusiveness and assimilation. They believe the liberal elites are snobs who look down on them as second-class citizens whose opinions don't matter and whose votes shouldn't count, and they deeply resent it. They think they've been exploited by the richest catering to the poorest in our society, exactly, to the point where the American dream is increasingly out of reach for those in the middle. They see liberals, or the modern incarnation of progressives/socialists, as irresponsible big spenders who are bankrupting the country, who are anti-law enforcement, anti-God, anti-military, and downright anti-American. Populists believe that elites advocate for the nanny state and cradle-to-grave big government, so they can be in charge of picking the winners and losers. They think elitists want to confiscate their hard-earned money and dole it out to people who, unlike them, have done nothing to deserve it. And, according to statistics, would actually be worse off with it in the long run, but, whatever. Populists see Trump as the only guy who has ever acknowledged them or stood up for their interests. In 3 years, he's improved the economy to the point where they and their neighbors all have jobs, and good ones at that. For the first time in years, they can take a family vacation and buy a new car. They are optimistic about their own and their children's future. They don't mind Trump's bluntness, political incorrectness, tweet storms, or rascally behavior. Some of them even approve of all this because Trump is saying what a lot of them think, but have been too afraid to say out loud. They can't understand the Washington insiders who are trying to throttle Trump and kick him out of office. Well, I think people don't mind Trump's bluntness because that can be kind of crude at times, but we would prefer that over someone who just does the normal politician thing where they say something that sounds good, but there's no substance or meaning there. Which would you rather have? Something that sounds good on paper and it's all classy and sophisticated, but there's nothing behind it and nothing that's going to come out of it. It's just false promises. Or somebody who says something just super straightforward in a way that's easy to understand, but crude and maybe offensive to some people, but actually has substance behind it and will actually do what, those words will actually do what they're saying they will do. So it's pretty obvious that, to me, it makes sense to sacrifice sophistication for substance, I guess. But anyway, they can't understand the Washington insiders who are trying to throttle Trump and kick him out of office. But they can, though. It's so obvious that the elite ruling class that's in power wants power, and Trump is a threat to that. To me, it's obvious why politicians would want Trump out of office. To populists, Trump has been an exceptionally good president. I guess I'm a populist. It's as if both groups are living in separate but parallel universes, each seeing themselves and each other in complete reverse, like a film negative where black is white and white is black, up is down, and left to right becomes right to left. There's no middle ground, no room for compromise, no ability to see the others as the others see themselves, no willingness to see ourselves as the others see us. There's little tolerance for the belief system of the other camp, or even the recognition that the people who disagree with them can still be good people, fully entitled to their own opinions. The question used to be, are you a Republican or a Democrat? But even those lines have now become jumbled. Today it is, are you a populist or an elitist? Are you a nationalist or a globalist? Are you with Trump or against him? In other words, we've evolved into a society that does everything possible to emphasize what divides us politically, yet very little to nurture what unites us or champions our common purpose. And according to astrology that I've seen, we will become united. It's just unclear exactly what will unite us or how that will happen, what events will happen along the way, or what common beliefs we will share. But we are in a cycle where we're going to return to a place where where we are united on some level. It's almost like we're just fighting right now to determine what the new status quo is going to be, or what the agreement or unification is going to be about, or what those new values will be. All of us from each side of the divide are painfully aware that we have a serious national problem, even if we blame the other side for having started it and for keeping it going. The only thing both sides agree on is that it's not their fault. As far as they're concerned, the other side landed the first punch, and they're just defending themselves. Okay, so that ends chapter 2, and I will keep reading another time.